Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. So today I'm coming at you with a foundation routine, and I'm basically going to give some tips and tricks on how to get flawless full coverage foundation that lasts for a really long time and just looks super nice, super beat. And yeah, let's get into the video. The key to flawless skin is all in the prep. So one of my first tips is to use a blurring or smoothing primer. For me, my main concern is covering up blemishes, so I prefer to use a blurring primer, whereas if your main concern was skin texture, then you should use a smoothing primer. Because I have oily skin, I like to put this down first or mix it with a second primer. This is a mattifying primer, so I just like to use this in more of my problem areas just to keep the skin nice and matte so it lasts all day. If you don't want to go out and buy something new, you could always mix in your liquid illuminator with your primer, or even mix it into your foundation. I just prefer not to dilute the foundation because obviously what you're aiming for is full coverage, so anything you add is going to minimize the coverage, but if you like to do that, then go ahead. So now I'm going to go in with foundation. Now one thing I find when I'm trying to get the most coverage, it's best to apply the foundation onto your face with your finger or your brush, and then go in with a brush to blend it out. I always say a brush is better for coverage because sponges just suck up the coverage and give you a more airbrush lighter finish. And for brushes, I always prefer buffing brushes, these really dense brushes, because these just don't move the product around as much, they don't take in as much of the product, and they just give you the nice smooth finish. And what you want to do is just buff it in. You don't want to do any circular motions. You basically just want to pat it in like this and just carefully spread it around like that. You don't want to do too much in terms of moving the product, so that's why you put it on with your fingers in the place that you need it most, and then blend it out from there, because this will give you the best coverage and the smoothest results. If you have any specific blemishes that you see that aren't covered as much as you want them to be, just go back in and apply more foundation and just let it sit on that area to dry down a little bit, because when it dries down you're going to get more coverage out of it. And just follow the same steps of just buffing it in. Another thing I will say is never use the concealer you use under your eyes to conceal a blemish. When you want to conceal something, you want to use something darker, because if you put something light, it's going to bring attention to it. That's why you should just use the foundation use your foundation to cover it, or a concealer that is your skin tone or darker, not a contour colour, something that is just slightly darker to draw attention away from that area, especially if it is a raised blemish. So I'm just going in with a little bit more foundation on my problem areas. Another tip to make sure your base is as flawless as possible is to spray your face using setting spray in between steps. So I'm just going to go in with some Homemade Fix Plus, and I'm going to use a beauty blender to just bounce it into the skin, just to make sure my skin looks as airbrushed as possible. And if you have excess foundation like on the back of your hand or on a mixing palette, what you want to do is just dab the beauty blender in that so it's not taking off coverage because it already has product on the beauty blender, and then just pat in that setting spray. And this is just going to make your skin look as smooth as possible and prevent it from looking cakey. When I'm doing a flawless base, I prefer to cream contour first, just because it's easier to then clean up with highlight and just make everything look as blended as possible. So I'm just going to take a little bit in the normal regions that you'd contour, a tiny bit down the bridge of the nose, and this is more for colour balance than to change the shape of my nose, because if you put contour just on your cheeks, it will look unbalanced and it will look strange if you don't take the colour around other parts of your face, because obviously when you contour, what you're trying to do is bring back the dimension, and you don't just have dimension in your cheeks. I'm just going to take this brush and buff that in. When it comes to contour, I prefer to use a brush rather than a sponge, because I just find it's much more precise. So you just want to take circular motions and bring it up, not down. And with contour, you want to use as little as possible, because you don't want it to affect the overall tone of your base. Because often with contour you're using a much cooler toned product, something to give the illusion of a shadow, and your face naturally doesn't look like a shadow, so you don't want it to just take over your whole face. And then I'm just going to take my foundation brush and just brush at the front, because I don't like the contour to look too harsh at the front of my cheeks. So I'm just going to buff it in and make sure it's completely blended, and go under the cheeks as well. So I'm just going to take the Maybelline Instant Age Eraser, and I'm going to put this about here between where my cheekbones are and my inner eye, and I'm going to leave this place blank for a lighter colour. So I just like to use this as kind of a perimeter colour, and I'll also use this to reverse contour because I don't want that to be too harsh. And then I'm just going to take this lighter shade and put it right under my eye, and then in the rest of the regions I want to highlight in. So you can blend this in with a brush or with a beauty blender, whatever you prefer. I'm going to start off with my brush and then go in with my beauty blender afterwards. So I'm just going to start off with my chin highlight first and just blend that in. Again, it's just buffing motions, not swirling. With the nose highlight, because I don't want it to spread, the way I'm going to blend it in is basically just maintaining this movement and not moving my brush from side to side, just keeping it straight and going up and down until the highlight is completely blended in, like this. I find that this movement just keeps the colour where you want it and keeps it as precise as possible. So you blend out the areas that you want the most coverage at the very end, so the product dries down and you get more coverage. That's why I leave my eyes till the end, because I want the most highlight to be concentrated under my eyes. So I'm just going to start off with my brush. I'm going to start off buffing the ends into the rest of my foundation. Now that the outer part is blended in, I'm going to go in with a beauty blender and blend the innermost part in as well. And again, I'm just dabbing, I'm not moving the sponge around too much, and just keeping the product exactly where I put it. And when you're blending under your eye, you always want to look up so you don't get creasing under your eye. Now that that's done and it's all blended in, I'm going to spray my face again, this time with the L'Oreal Infallible mix, just to make sure the base lasts as long as possible and also to make sure everything is completely blended in. And again, you can take the end of your beauty blender just to pat that in again. Another tip for flawless foundation is not to overbake. It's kind of a matter of trial and error and just seeing what works best for your skin, but what I find is a light layer usually works for everyone, and you're not necessarily baking, you're kind of more setting. The powder I'm going to use today is the Maybelline Fit Me Loose Powder. I'm just going to take a little bit on my sponge, like this, and I'm going to dab it in the lid, just to make it as even on the sponge as possible. I don't like to blow on the sponge because it's kind of unhygienic, so I just dabbed it in to make it smoother, and I'm gonna look up and just press it into my skin. It's always best to start off with a little bit and then go in with more, so you can just see if you think your skin could do with a little bit more. I'm just gonna, because I have quite creasy under eyes, just do a little bit more right in the corner. Again, there's not much on my sponge, and I'm gonna take it over my eyelid as well. So as you can see, it's small, but it's made the difference that you want. I feel like not overbaking is especially important when you're using a powder shade that is much lighter than your skin tone, like a banana shade, because when you overdo it, it affects the whole tone of your base and can make you look ashy, which obviously nobody wants that. I find that I don't really need loose powder on anywhere other than around my nose, because that's where I get oily. So I'm just going to take the bottom of the beauty blender and just put a little bit on my kind of T-zone region. For the rest of my face, I like to set with a finishing powder. There are lots of different finishing powders you can use, but they're really key for making your skin look as smooth as possible. So I like to use this L'Oreal True Match one in the shade W9, or I like to go in with a tiny bit of my Studio Fix if I'm going for a really glam full coverage day. For this, I'm just going to take a big fluffy face brush like this, a big fluffy powder brush, and I'm going to mix the two powders today. And I much prefer to use a face powder all over the face, because there's no point matching your foundation perfectly just to ruin it by using a powder that doesn't match your skin and just makes your skin look ashy. And I'm making sure to go over my eyes just to make sure that there's no excess powder still on there. When I'm going for a full coverage look, I also like to make sure that I bronze, because it just brings warmth back to your face and makes your face look really smooth as well. So I'm just going to go in with this other True Match powder from L'Oreal. This is in the shade 10W, I believe, or Deep Golden. And I'm just going to go kind of in the perimeters of my face like this. It doesn't have to be neat, it's just something to bring colour to your face and just again add dimension. Now I'm going to contour. I'm going to use the Sleek Dark Face Form palette. I'm going to take this angled contour brush and I'm just going to dip the end into the contour like this, just the very end, so you can see it's only on the very bottom of the brush. And I'm just going to put this into my cheek and make sure it's hugging my cheek and just brush round and up. And I'm basically using the top of that to brush out the contour and just make sure it's completely blended. You don't want to cover the whole brush in the contour shade because it will make the contour look really harsh, and in a way it will just defeat the purpose of being a contour, because the contour is supposed to be focused right here, almost like a line, not across your whole cheek. Once that's done, I then like to take a tapered brush like this one. I prefer something that's not too dense, just so you don't pack on too much powder, and then take on the same setting powder that I used under my eyes and on my T-zone, and just reverse contour with this as well, just to make it look as precise as possible. You can also go back on top of your nose and above your lip on the highlighted regions. And then I'm just going to brush that off. I'm not leaving it to sit there for very long. I'm just going to take the same powder brush and just brush it away. The next step for me is blush. I like to use blush because it just brings back colour to the face, and you can use blush to add warmth or just to balance out the different tones on your face. Today I'm going to use this shade in the NIP+FAB Blush Brights palette, and I just like to smile and tap onto the apples of my cheek and then blend out. Once that's done, I then like to go back in with yet another spray. It seems excessive, but it really does just make your skin look so much smoother and just melt all the powders together, everything you've used, just melt it on top so it just looks so much nicer, and it also makes it last so much longer as well. So I'm going to go in now with this Milani Make It Last spray. You can really use the same spray all over. I just don't like to use this one too much because it can make your skin look really dry if you use a lot of it. For highlighter today, I'm going to be using my Glow Kit Sun Dips palette. I'm going to take the shade Bronzed, and whilst the skin's still slightly tacky, I'm just going to take this teardrop shaped brush. I prefer to use this over a fan brush because it just disperses the highlight so much more nicely and doesn't leave it looking patchy. So I'm just going to tap in like this and tap the excess off and just brush it on. It's always better to start with a tiny bit and then build it up, because when you put too much on, it's harder to fix than to just add more. So I like to tap in this edge of the brush and tap it on like that, and then take the top and just blend it in. So it looks super soft and like it's a glow from within. I like to stack my highlights, so I'm going to go in with Fenty Beauty Trophy Wife as well. And I'm just going to use a teeny tiny bit of this. And I'm going to keep it more concentrated to the inner parts of the highlight and not take it out as far as I did the other one, just to add a bit more shine. And I also like to stack my highlight just to mix different tones. Yeah, so that is my go-to routine for flawless foundation. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one. Be sure to check out my Instagram, like, share, comment, subscribe, all of that good stuff, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!